Well, first of all, thank you both for being here. This is actually a pretty big moment in international relations, I think, for our country. I think you would both agree with that. For people that are going to watch or thinking about this issue, the first thing, I think you both touched on this in your statements, is freedom of navigation in the seas has been the linchpin of this economic growth and prosperity that we've seen in the post-Second World War era. And that's particularly true of the Asia-Pacific region. And the South China Sea in particular, I believe, the last time I checked, is a place where a significant percentage of global commerce is now transiting through. So this matters in real time to people in this country. In essence, I guarantee you there are things in this room right now that came to this country as it transited through the South China Sea and vice versa for our exports. So this is incredibly important. And what China's basically challenging is that world order. What China's basically doing here is they are challenging the idea that there is such a thing as freedom of navigation. They've challenged this particular sea for a long time. If you look at their passports, for a long, long time, that 9-dash line was on there. They have claimed that they own this, among other places, for a very long time. Now they're beginning to act on it. And so that's the first part. Now let me preface this by saying I have no quarrel with the Chinese people, who I believe are great people, who by and large have the desire to move forward with prosperity and with their lives, and we engage with them constantly. I have no quarrel with China. I have a big quarrel with the Chinese Communist Party, which I believe is more interested in the future security of the Chinese Communist Party than they are of the nation itself. This is a country who views all their neighbors as tributary states that need to be subservient to China. This is a country that views the United States as a declining power. They make the argument to the countries in the region that America cannot be counted on to live up to its security assurances. And that's why this is such a critical moment. And by the way, this is also illustrative of another point, and that is all these international things that China signs on to, they're signatories to the Law of the Sea Treaty. They agreed to this process by which they lost under, and now they view as illegitimate. So how can we trust them on anything they sign when they're willing to ignore it? This is a big, big problem. And I think, and I hope that the position of the administration and the next administration will be that we will never accept these arguments, that there will be no part of these illegitimately claimed areas that we will not sail through and challenge, that we will never accept it as a matter of course, whether it's the air defense zone that they've claimed or this illegitimate claims that they make now. And Mr. Campbell, you were one of the architects of the so-called pivot to Asia, and you've written extensively about this policy. So I would just ask you, what is, and I think you've touched on this already, but what is your assessment of the success of this policy after 5 years after it was announced, and specifically, and maybe what needs to be done next? And on that point, I want to make one editorial comment in addition to the 2.5-minute editorial comment I just made, which is this is why the defense sequester is so crazy. It's nuts, because we need to be able to fund our ability to project power in the region, because in the end, all the diplomatic rhetoric, all the speeches from the Senate are worthless if we do not have the physical capability to deliver on our security assurances that we've made to our allies in the region, both in South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, and others. But what is your assessment, Mr. Campbell, of the state of affairs on the pivot to Asia, and what is the next iteration of it moving forward as we go into a new administration and a new Congress?
Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate the question, and thank you for your service. I will say, I don't mean any harm by this, but I will say what I appreciated very much is how open your office was to us. You'd asked us to come up to be briefed about Asia, asked very good questions. You challenged us a lot, but you also were very respectful. I actually would say one of the most important things that we're going to need to sustain to be effective in Asia is to maintain a bipartisan commitment. And that's incredibly difficult, but I think you all, each in your own way, have laid out the enormous American stakes in what's involved here and the need to do more. Look, I think the rebalance or pivot is proceeding in fits and starts, to be honest. And part of that is we got a lot of domestic issues. It's impossible to leave the Middle East and South Asia given what's going on now, and that's where the focus really is. And so you gotta find time in other parts of the schedule to make sure that strategic focus comes from key senators. Very grateful for the team that came to Shangri-La, very much noticed by friends in the region as a whole. I think the administration has done a pretty good job in trying to make clear that this is where our future lies, but we're going to have to do much more. I agree with you about sequester. I'd like to see much more active diplomatic engagement generally. really at the base of much of this. I know we focus mostly on the military dimension, but a lot of this is a diplomatic game. We've got to be very effective in terms of how we pursue our interests. No American politician in the last 25 years have given a speech in America, about why Asia is important. We have not tried to convince our American people about what we're about. There have been hundreds and thousands of speeches about Fallujah and Iraq and Afghanistan, all important, but no one has said, you know, this is why we engage. This is why we're out there. We give those speeches in Asia. We don't do them at home. So I think we have our work cut out for us, and we had at the beginning of this administration a little childish back and forth where some would say we're back in Asia and others would say no, we'd never left. Senator Rubio, I would take a position that both are wrong. For us to be back in Asia is going to take decades. It's going to take multiple presidents, deep, substantial engagement. And for those who say we never left Asia, the price of admittance has gone up dramatically. What used to pass for effective diplomacy and military engagement 15 or 20 years won't get it done. Will not get it done today. Now, as we speak, we have 2 aircraft carriers in the Asia-Pacific region deployed. That should be a regular part of our engagement, not something that happens occasionally. So I commend you on the work that you've done to try to undo the sequester, and I also want to see you continue your role of really focusing on the Asia-Pacific region. I'll do everything I can to support that. Thanks, Senator.
Senator Rubio, I listened carefully to what you said. I think one thing you perhaps are missing about the Chinese people is that they are, whether the Communist Party whips them up or not, extremely nationalistic and feel that China's destiny is much larger than what it currently is. They believe that for the last 150 years they were physically carved up by outside countries, notably Japan, but also a large number of European countries and even the United States. Now they've become the second largest economy in the world. They've grown tremendously, and they feel their time has come. So, and they feel their time has come in a pretty crude way, which means that they should be the #1 dog in their part of the world, and everybody else should adjust. So I think this is deeper than just the Chinese Communist Party, which is ruling them, and it's pretty understandable in terms of their history. So I think what the United States does has to channel that Chinese, which I think is a national feelings and desires, by presenting military situations in which the costs of aggression are too high. Channel that great Chinese energy, which we've seen in so many other countries, Chinese American citizens here in the United States, Taiwan, Singapore, other very vibrant Chinese companies, into an area in which they can make tremendous advances by their economic prowess, by their cultural attainments, but just sort of set some military lines that say this far and no further. Then I think we can move forward properly.
Admiral, and I agree with you on the nationalistic and on their view of history. The last 100 years has been an aberration, and I understand all of that. And I don't disagree with your statement about that being a powerful sentiment in China. I would only add that I think the people in Korea, the people in Japan have their own ambitions for the future, and that is not to be a tributary state to China. And I would also add that I think I want China to be prosperous. I would love to have them as a partner on all these major issues we confront around the world. Imagine what a responsible Chinese government in the U.S. could do on issues of global jihadism and so forth. I can tell you what's going to be a big problem, and that is if that nationalism leads them to continue to steal secrets from our companies and our military in order to cut corners, if they aggressively act to take over international waters, and if they do to other places what they've done to Hong Kong, and or what they do now on the gross human rights violations. If they treat their own people that way, just imagine what they would do to other people that they gained any sort of power and control over, and that cannot happen. That would be a major, major problem.
I think we're in violent agreement there, Senator. Right.
Thank you, Senator Rubio.